Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Helena, aka NoJusticeMTG, and tonight I'm joined by Dalia Gebrial. Dalia, there's a disturbance in the force. Ladies' night's the wrong way round.
I know, but it's going to be like this for a little while. I forgot to mention in our last show, I am taking a little hiatus from my hosting duties because I'm working on a book and I'm also doing my day job, which is lecturing at university. And those kids need someone to teach them, so I thought I need to put my nose in them books for a little bit over the next term. But I'm very glad that we're going to still see each other every Thursday, because what would I do without you, Helena?
The feeling is absolutely mutual, as always. Absolute pleasure to have you tonight. Speaking of which, coming up tonight, we talk to a UNICEF spokesperson, Tess Ingram, about starvation in Gaza. UK Council services are on life support. Ash Sarkar takes on the Tony Blair Institute on Newsnight, and we'll look at some clips from that. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Russian strikes overnight on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, have sparked an international incident after British Council and EU buildings were damaged in the attack. This was the moment a compound containing the British Council offices in Kyiv was struck twice at around 5:40 a.m. this morning. Here you can see the damage to the building, the grey one in the background, along with the surrounding areas. Windows were blown out and interior structures destroyed in what is being described as major damage. The council security guard was also injured but is in stable condition. Also hit was the European Union delegation building nearby. The strike shattered windows and caused ceilings to collapse, but all staff were later reported safe. The attacks resulted in immediate diplomatic action in London and Brussels, with Foreign Secretary David Lammy posting this. Putin's strikes last night killed civilians, destroyed homes and damaged buildings, including the British Council and EU delegation in Kyiv. We have summoned the Russian ambassador. The killing and destruction must stop. That summons indeed took place. The Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Killen, as seen here arriving at the Foreign Office this afternoon. Meanwhile, the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, also summoned the Russian envoy in Brussels. And the bloc's deputy spokesperson, Ariana Podesta, said this. This is a question for Russia on what was the aim of the strike. What is clear is that Russia strikes constantly on civilian facilities as well. People have died in this horrible attack. Of course, we have been in touch. The president has been in touch with the ambassador for what concerns the safety of the EU staff. But these attacks of Russia on civilians, and it's just one of many that we have seen also in other areas of Ukraine, just in this last few hours, are completely unacceptable. In no way will they change the resolve of the European Union in supporting Ukraine. Our support to Ukraine is unshakable, as always, and Russia's threats also by hitting our facilities will change nothing in our commitment to supporting Ukraine to be in a position of strength now and in the future. As Podesta said there, civilians were killed in last night's attack, with at least 18 people dead, including 3 children. The attack does seem to have been indiscriminate, hitting residential buildings, including houses, across 8 districts of the capital. One 5-story apartment building was hit, with rescuers still hunting for those beneath the rubble. Many EU leaders are seeing the attack on civilians as well as European diplomatic sites so soon after the beginning of an apparent peace process with Russia as a deliberate flaunting of those efforts by the Kremlin. This was Kaja Kallas' response. While the world seeks a path to peace, Russia responds with missiles. The overnight attack on Kyiv shows a deliberate choice to escalate and mock the peace efforts. Russia must stop the killing and negotiate. And EU Ambassador to Ukraine, Katerina Matanova, said this. Russia's peace last night, a massive strike on Kyiv with drones and ballistic missiles. At least 10 killed, 30 injured, many buildings destroyed. The EU delegation was severely damaged by the shockwave. This is Moscow's true answer to peace efforts. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez also weighed in, saying this. Each aggression by Russia in this unjust war is a new blow against peace. The attack on a diplomatic mission is a new flagrant violation of international law. All my solidarity with the Chief of Staff at the EU delegation in Kyiv, the victims and the Ukrainian people. Now, according to Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, Russia is still pursuing the path of peace. Peskov said this. The Russian armed forces are also carrying out their tasks. As stated, they continue to strike military and military-related infrastructure. The strikes are successful, the targets are being destroyed, and the special military operation continues. At the same time, Russia remains interested in continuing the negotiation process in order to achieve our goals through political and diplomatic means. Well, clear strikes on civilian targets and claims that it is definitely only military targets that are being hit. Where have we heard that before? Dalia, does this look like a Russian military and a Russian entity here that is interested in pursuing a path of peace to you?
Well, I mean, there are, of course, rules and norms and laws that govern war, that if you violate them, you are sending a very particular message to the international community. And one of those norms is you don't hit diplomatic sites during peace talks. Those norms also include, and those laws also include, not killing aid workers. They also include not hitting civilian infrastructure. And of course, as I said, Russia has violated that, and it violated those norms and laws when it invaded Ukraine illegally. Unfortunately, the West, including Europe and including Britain and the US, have created a world in which those international norms and laws mean absolutely nothing, from the invasion of Iraq to the absolute horrors that we are seeing in Gaza being conducted by a so-called Western ally, Israel. When we look back at the war in Iraq, this was clearly an illegal war. It was known at the time that this was an illegal war. If it wasn't an illegal war, they wouldn't have had to lie in order to get it passed. And not only has no one faced accountability for that, but the people who perpetrated that, George Bush, Tony Blair, are to this day treated as, good historic statesmen. The red carpet is rolled out for them at every opportunity. And so, particularly within this moment, when Russia has committed this escalation, it simply doesn't run when you have Britain and Europe continuing to aid and abet a state, the state of Israel, who is flagrantly and in front of our very eyes continuing to commit war crimes, that are continuing to kill journalists, kill aid workers, decimate the civilian population, starve the civilian population, a population they are occupying, decimating all of these civilian infrastructure, and nothing is happening. And not only are Western states aiding and abetting it, not only countries like Britain continuing to fly surveillance planes over Gaza and feeding that information back to a state that is, under very credible accusations of committing war crimes, but our people, our prime minister is in fact enthusiastically defending it. We all remember at the very beginning of this war on Gaza, Keir Starmer saying, that Israel has the right to cut off food and water to Gaza. And so to me, it really is, the message to me here is, you really cannot create a world in which international law and norms governing war mean nothing, and then expect to live in a world where those norms and laws mean something. And that's the consequences of those decisions, which go way back. They don't just begin with what Israel is doing in Gaza, but they go back to the Iraq war in particular. I think that was a real flashpoint in the contemporary decimation of international norms. We are now bearing out the consequences of those decisions that no one has been held accountable for. And what I will say is, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, a lot of people in the Middle East, politicians, journalists, but also regular people, were feeling incredibly frustrated, and they were feeling incredibly angry at the moralizing tone that states like Europe, the US, that states within Europe and states like the US and Britain were taking on Putin illegally invading Ukraine, not because they have any particular investment in what's going on in Russia or Ukraine, or because they land within a particular side, but because they were saying, is this not what you did to us? And you got away scot-free, and you continue to position yourself as the law-abiding moral superior to us. And now you're crying wolf that the same thing is happening to one of your allies. And it was a point of, people in the Middle East already kind of know know this hypocrisy. They know it very well. But to me, I was very interested in looking at how people in that region observed what was taking place in Russia and Ukraine, because it was kind of like the final falling of the mask, that what you did to us, what you did to people in the Arab world, was something that you did because you feel like that laws and norms and human rights just doesn't apply to people like us. And when you see this differential reaction between when a state like Russia commits these war crimes versus a state like Israel committing these war crimes, you begin to see that international law is not international law. It's actually law that is used to keep the powerless contained. And when you have a set of laws that don't apply to people in power, but only apply to the powerless, then that's not law. That's just authoritarianism and colonialism.
I absolutely agree with every word that you said there. It's just, I mean, it seems so kind of morally obvious to me, right? Ethno-nationalist revanchism is bad, right? It's bad when Russia does it, and it's bad when Israel does it. And yet, the flagrant hypocrisy of the West, wanting to put itself up as some kind of moral arbiter in terms of geopolitics, can look at what, in my mind, when you look at the justifications, right? Oh, well, this land was promised to us 80 years ago versus this land was promised to us 2,000 years ago. It seems such one-to-one as a comparison. And for the blatant levels of hypocrisy from Western nations to only apply those rules to people who they deem to be against them rather than those who they are allied with, again, purely for self-interested reasons, right? It means that it opens the door for everyone else to go, well, this rule system doesn't make any sense. And what's frustrating as well is there are loads of countries in the global south. You look at nations in South America, and they really do want to see international law upheld in every instance. That some of the countries that these kind of laws were originally thought about, these kind of conventions were used to discipline them initially. They've already been on the receiving end of the ways in which it's used to discipline nations outside of the American unipolarity sphere of influence. And yet, in the modern world, they're now the ones who are the last defenders of what should be a universal system of international norms and of geopolitics. And that's the great tragedy, is that there is plenty of interest and support for having a universal standard here. And it is the West's flagrant and obvious hypocrisy that has made this, however long, just over 80 years of normality be ripped up, essentially in the course of 2 years, because they just can't tell Israel no. It's as simple as that. The United Nations officially declared famine in Gaza last Friday, after the exacting standards of the IPC were met in Gaza City and surrounding areas. That's the UN-backed body responsible for defining, assessing, and reporting on food insecurity, malnutrition, and starvation conditions. According to the IPC, at least 500,000 people in Gaza are now at risk of facing starvation. And the worst consequences of that man-made famine, entirely man-made and imposed by Israel, continue to be felt across the Strip. In the past 36 hours, a further 14 Palestinians have starved to death in Gaza, including at least 4 children. Israel's blockade of Gaza isn't just about food, though. It also involves medicines, meaning those in Gaza who suffer from medical conditions are deprived of both nourishment and treatment, a potentially double deadly combination. One of those is 21-year-old Mohammed Riyad Zanoun, who is battling kidney disease. He was receiving treatment in Khan Yunis's Nasser hospital, where doctors said his condition was deteriorating due to a combination of malnutrition and a lack of life-saving medicines. On Monday, the Nasser hospital was hit by 2 direct Israeli airstrikes, one after the other, killing at least 20 people, including 5 journalists, medical workers, and emergency responders. We have no idea where Mohammed is now, or what Israel's attack will mean for him, but his case shows the compound nature of Israel's assault on Gaza, where an entire population is now deprived of adequate food and medical care, while constantly being displaced, being bombed, as Israel presses on towards the occupation of the entire enclave. As ever, the most powerful nations in the world have been slow to respond. But on Wednesday night, 14 of the 15 members of the UN Security Council issued a joint statement calling the Gaza famine a man-made crisis. The outlier, of course, the United States of America, which continues to support Israel's starvations of the Palestinians in the Strip. Earlier today, I was joined by UNICEF spokesperson Tess Ingram, who spoke to me from northern Gaza. She's on her 4th visit to the enclave since Israel's assault began 21 months ago. And I began by asking her how much Gaza had changed since her last trip there.
Everything's changed. The last time I was here, it was in February when we had a ceasefire and we were getting 600 trucks of aid in a day. Children weren't being killed by constant heavy indiscriminate bombardments. It's like a different world at the moment. Of course, we are not getting that volume of aid in. The bombs continue to fall, killing and injuring children, burying them underneath rubble every day. And now we have the classification of a famine.
Can you talk a bit more about how famine manifests itself in these circumstances? What does it look like on the ground?
The word that comes immediately to mind is desperation. The thing that you see first is parents desperately trying to find any way to keep their child alive. I've been to so many nutrition treatment points in the last week, and these are places where UNICEF is providing supplies to try and help prevent or treat malnutrition in children. And there are just crowds of parents at the door trying to get in to get their child screened to find out what their level of malnutrition is. And at these screenings, it was shocking. It was really malnourished child after malnourished child, diagnosis after diagnosis, which is really unusual for the Gaza Strip. We have to remember that before this escalation in October 2023, malnutrition basically didn't exist in the Gaza Strip. And now we have incredibly high rates of malnutrition among children. In Gaza City, it's between 15 and 20%, which is well beyond famine thresholds. And so you see that in the desperation, in the number of children diagnosed, and of course in the children's very small, frail bodies.
UNRWA media advisor Adnan Abu Hasna has told Al Jazeera that the amount of aid entering Gaza has declined over the past 2 weeks, and no medical equipment was delivered in that time. Can you talk a bit about that?
I'm not sure specifically about the amount of medical equipment that has come in. I know that UNICEF has been getting nutrition supplies in. We've managed to get in treatments for malnourished children, high energy biscuits to help prevent and respond to malnutrition in pregnant and breastfeeding women. But it's important to note that what we are getting in is nowhere near enough. We need to get back to those ceasefire levels of 500 to 600 trucks a day, where at the moment, as you know, that's for the whole UN. At the moment, as the UN and partners, we're doing 100 trucks on a good day. So we're still far, far, far from meeting just basic needs, and it has to scale up quickly in order to stop this famine from spreading, which is what these international experts have warned will happen in the coming weeks if we don't get on top of this.
The IPC's confirmation of a famine has brought a lot of public attention. Is there any sense that that's changed anything on the ground currently?
No, not in a way that is noticeable or meaningful to that mum, to that mother who is desperate to find a solution to save her child. There's been no considerable change for her and for her baby. And we need to see that. Like, that is where it matters. That is where we see the tangible change that is important. And so words from the international community are great, but they're not going to help that mum. We really need to see international words turn into action, and that action turn into pressure on, one, the parties to the conflict to agree a ceasefire. That is the best medicine for a famine. But failing that, pressure on the Israeli authorities to open all of the crossings into the Gaza Strip, to allow aid in at scale, and to give us the boring term, but like the enabling conditions on the ground to be able to move that aid around safely and make sure that it reaches the people who so desperately need it.
The international media are banned from Gaza, and Palestinian journalists are being systematically murdered. Is the reality of this famine actually getting out to the world in a way that it captures the essence of what's going on?
I think the Palestinian reporters here are doing a remarkable job and have done for almost 2 years now in communicating what is happening. As you said, so many have been killed, but they're continuing to do the job, continuing to put their lives at risk to explain what is happening here in the Gaza Strip. As humanitarian workers, we're also trying to do the same. Our mandate is to deliver aid, but we're also reading out to you because the international media is not here to do that job. I think if the international media were allowed in, it'd be much harder for critics to refute the reality on the ground, because when you are here, it is simple and it is clear. There is absolutely no doubt in anybody's mind here on the ground what is unfolding.
And do you personally think that the famine is a strategy to try and get the population of Gaza to leave, make the conditions so intolerable that they feel like they have no other choice but to leave?
This is engineered scarcity. This is clearly a result of deliberate decisions that are being made. And that was also something that was reinforced by this group, this IPC group of experts. And We have been calling now, again, for almost 2 years for the volume of aid into the Gaza Strip to be increased. And yet we still see these very meagre levels of aid coming in through the United Nations and our humanitarian partners. And the alternative response that has been set up, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, also not providing an adequate response. In fact, it's proving to be unsafe and it's not working. So there needs to be, I think, a moment of international clarity that what is happening here is not inevitable. It is a result of decisions that are being made, and those decisions need to be addressed, or more children will keep dying.
One of the key justifications that the Israeli government are giving for the restrictions of aid into Gaza is the claim that Hamas are stealing the aid for themselves and it's not actually going to the people in Palestine. Is there any truth to the narrative that Israel is trying to push on this?
Not that I have ever seen, and not that the United Nations has ever been presented. We've been asked, if you have this evidence, show it to us. And it has never been put to us. And if there was evidence, given the amount of information war that is underway here, wouldn't you have seen more of that evidence? So again, if there is that evidence, provide it to us. But our understanding, from the ground, and being on these missions and taking the aid from the crossing directly to the mother and her child in their place of refuge, is that the vast majority of it reaches the people who need it. And yes, at the moment, we are seeing some aid being taken off the back of trucks. I'm sure, you've seen those videos, but that's because of the desperation within the community that, people have been deprived for so long that it makes complete sense that a parent trying to provide for their child will take what they can off the back of a truck as it passes by. But the solution to that is simple. If we can flood the Gaza Strip with aid, people will know when they're going to get their next meal. They'll know the next time an aid distribution is happening, and they won't have to resort to that level of looting.
I think on a personal level, if it was me, right, and the Israeli authorities were claiming somehow the job that I was doing was being hampered by somebody else and that the narrative that's being pushed by them was correct and the humanitarian organizations were somehow not relaying the facts that Israel's trying to push out, that Hamas is stealing this aid, I would personally feel very aggrieved because I can see the work that the humanitarian organizations are doing on the ground in Gaza, and I have nothing but the utmost respect and admiration for the hard work that people like you do. Does it personally feel frustrating to you to see the Israeli narrative on this one that can, I guess, personally impugn, or at least impugn the reputation of organizations on the ground, that they are essentially trying to say that the job they're doing isn't good enough for Gazans because of what they're trying to say about the looting of aid?
The claim on the looting of aid, but also the claim on the fact that the United Nations isn't able to do the job, that we're letting supplies rot in the sun because we can't get there to pick it up, is just simply offensive. We are busting our guts around the clock to get that aid to the people that need it. And a vast majority of our team are Palestinian colleagues who are enduring the same conditions on the ground as their communities, and yet they turn up every day hungry, not having slept because of all of the bombardments, looking after their children, trying to keep them safe, the same as everybody else here in Gaza. But then they turn up and do a 20-hour round trip to the crossing to try and collect supplies and take them to our warehouse or directly to a distribution. So, yeah, it is really offensive because our teams here are doing absolutely everything in their power to try and save lives.
People in the UK are just not really having kids anymore. And on Wednesday, the ONS reported that fertility rates in England, Scotland and Wales have fallen to their lowest level on record. Now, we've argued many times before that the slow vanishing of children from our villages, our towns and our cities is a direct consequence of people's material conditions becoming harder and harder. The price of housing, the lack of sustainable housing for ordinary families, the cost of living, the erosion of our public services, and the atomization of our communities are all factors that put having children out of people's reach. But they're pretty abstract ideas, which is why when we heard about a vital community centre in London's Tottenham being peacefully occupied by mums and their kids this summer to protest its closure, we just had to take a look at a community fighting back. the Downlanes Park Community Centre in the London Borough of Haringey has run a programme of free kids activities throughout the summer holidays for years, including sports, crafts and gardening. But no more after residents say Haringey Council decided to demolish the centre for, wait for it, a footpath, joining new build luxury flats to a nearby tube station. We sent Novara's Ash Sarkar to the community centre so she could meet the members involved in the occupation, as well as to see for herself some of the services it provides to help ordinary parents keep their kids occupied over the long summer holidays. Ash began by speaking to organisers and local residents, Emi and Devlo.
Why did you feel that the occupation was necessary as a step? Why not just negotiate with the council about what you wanted to do with the space?
Basically, summer holidays were coming up and there were no plans in place by the council to put on any sort of free activities here for families and children to rely on. And so we really saw the need to reuse the space, which families have been relying on for really, really long time, which has historically been a space for the community to come together, to celebrate the diversity of the area here, to learn from each other, and to put on community events, etc. And so, that's why we sort of took action and decided that we needed to organise stuff for the families and for the community ourselves and occupy this space, and have very successfully put on free holiday programme for the families here.
These groups and these parents who used to use the space have been in negotiations with the council for years about how it's first about how it was going to be refurbished, and then when that was out of the question, how it was going to be rebuilt. They were in consultations for years about this, and I think when the council stopped communicating with them in September 2024, there was a real sense of we need to take this ourselves, or the council aren't going to do it for us.
Next, Ash spoke to Isabel, a local mum who both uses the community centre and gives back by running craft workshops there too.
What does this community centre mean to you personally?
It's everything. It's everything because I'm single mom. I don't have family here, and it's not easy also to have friends. So for me, it's like sometimes they saw me in Asda and they told me, bye teacher, because, and I said, I'm not teacher, but just because I was running the workshop with craft with the kids, I was like so happy, and I'm so happy because I know some girls are attached to me. But I say, even for my kids, because they grown up here, and I think like I'm not the only person in that position. Many people here, we don't have families, we don't have it's difficult to have friends, and here the same community, the same volunteers, they come to be friends.
For many of the parents involved in the occupation, without the community centre, childcare costs would be overwhelming.
How important is the cost of childcare at the moment?
The cost of childcare is, I would say, is crazy. In the way, we want our children to learn. We want them to pick up with early years, but it's not affordable for everyone. It's not affordable. And for the community to have this space, you are coming to play and stay. You are coming with because it's not dropping, you drop, you go. You're staying with your child. As long as you are staying with your child, you too, you are learning something. So we had an activities for adults and for children. So the children are playing, and then they are young, innocent, they are learning full play. And then the mom on the other side is learning new skills. So we had like a sewing, mom cafe morning. Just as a women we are talking, we had yoga. Me, I always fell asleep on my yoga. When we start yoga, they say, Rebecca is not, I'm not. So I was finding it very peaceful.
Yeah.
Only ladies around us. And then they're dancing on Saturday.
Dancing on Saturdays?
Saturday, we was outside. I was first to come here. I want to exercise through dance. I wanted to move my body along. And then my children were saying, oh, there we go, Mama. They're always ready for me because they know I will enjoy it. So, because if a family can't afford the child care, and then for that family to fund the space here, parents are learning, and then the child is learning as well. Free meal is amazing.
And if you could say one thing to Haringey Council, let's imagine they're watching this video, what would you say to them?
I would say Haringey Council know how many children we have in the community, and then Haringey Council know what families want, because it won't be Haringey Council without families. And then they can do better. They can do better. I know some people in the it's like a team, is level. Sometimes people in the low level, they don't have decision, but they are feeling our pain, but they don't have voice. Yeah. So I would say work as a team. They have to consult residents, because they are there because of us, residents. They are there because of us. They are working for us, so we have to work together.
You pay their wages with tax.
Yeah, so we have to work together. Like, what's the resident want? What's the community want? Okay, can we have a fair decision? Let's have a balance. So, I'm just saying, we love Haringey. Haringey, we love you, love us back, and let's work together.
For some of those using the community centre, the biggest shock about the closure is that it's a Labour council behind it, especially since at least one government minister grew up in the neighbourhood.
Do you feel that, I don't know, it's a surprise that a Labour council has done that?
Yeah. So shocked. Labour would try to take away just the only centre in the area.
Do you feel that the Labour Party still cares about working class people?
No, they don't. They would not do it in Muswell Hill. Yeah? And that's Labour too. But they do it here because they think, oh, the people here, they're poor, you know. They don't know what's going on. And that's the reason they're doing it. What's going to happen to the children? Where would they go? Where would the parents go with the children during the holidays or even in the week? Where is there for them to go? I don't know. I am surprised.
I mean, you've been in the area for a long time.
Yes,
How have you seen Tottenham change?
The change with all the new buildings. I don't know why the buildings are so high. Where they're going to put the children, if they're going to put them up the top. I known David from a little one.
David Lammy?
Yeah. He lived I can't remember the name of the road. And he's not in this area anymore. And where has the care gone?
So you think that he made some money, he moved to the posh bit, and now he doesn't care?
And he doesn't care. I know him and his little sister in Dunghill's Infant when they were tiny. And now this is what's happening. If they open a calf in front there, where would all the children fit in? And it's going to be, 15 times smaller than this? I am so sad. I am really sad. I can't believe Haringey Council doing that. I mean, all the community charge, where all the money is going to. Have you seen that park? There's nothing in the park. There is nothing in the park for the children to play with. What about the special needs? They're supposed to be providing things for the special needs in the park too. There's nothing. Have you seen that bit over there?
What bit over there?
Yeah. There's nothing in there. Nothing at all. Nothing in there. Nothing in there. This is what we need for the children. I don't know what's going to happen. It's so sad, really, really sad.
Now, Haringey Council did issue a possession claim to evict the occupiers, but at a court hearing earlier this week, the group successfully delayed the order till next week, allowing their services to continue until the end of the school holidays. After that, though, there's a good chance it will go, to make way for, and I will say this again, a footpath. The community, though, has pledged to carry on pressuring the council to scrap the demolition and keep these services going. Dalia, a Labour council doing this kind of thing? I mean, this would be shocking. if this was 10 years ago. But nowadays, are we really that shocked?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we often sort of talk about, at least at the beginning of Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, we talked about, oh my God, he's a Blairite, and like how kind of terrible that was. But the fact is, we've quickly realised that he's much, much worse. He's keeping the aiding and abetting war crimes part of Blairism, but has gutted one of the very few things that Blairism delivered on, which is childcare infrastructure. Gordon Brown's childcare strategy really did one of the only things I would say that came out of the Blair era that I can say with, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but the fact that there were these youth centres and childcare centres where parents could drop their children off and they knew that those children were in a place with with other local children, and they were doing things that enriched them educationally, creatively. I grew up in the youth centre era. I know so many people who have developed lifelong passions: photography, music, art, crafts, all of these different things, because they learned that in their youth centre. And that has been entirely gutted, first of all, by Tory austerity, and it has continued under this Labour government. And, watching that package that Ash did, it made me think a lot about the fact that, we're seeing across streets all across England, people erecting England flags and Union Jacks all over the place, right? And we're seeing the kind of racialized hostility that is going along with that. We've seen the videos and they're very proud of it. I mean, these people who put these flags up, they live stream themselves racially abusing people right after they've stuck up an England flag somewhere. I know people personally in London who have been racially abused by people putting up those flags. And they're doing it because they're having this sense of like, we want our streets back. Our community is falling apart. Our country is falling apart. We feel out of control. We feel, broken as a people. And they want to make you think that, and that is a very real feeling. And they want to make you think that the reason that we are feeling that our communities are being torn apart, our communities are divided, that we are that all we do is work and work and work, and we don't get to spend time doing things that nourish us, that life is becoming increasingly unlivable, not just all across the country, but including in very wealthy cities like London. I mean, when it comes to just the very most simple part of being a human, which is having a family, it's impossible now. They talk about the childcare fees in that segment. Childcare costs in this country are absolutely astronomical. I mean, the average family in this country spends a third of their wages on childcare. That's compared to in Germany, where people pay 1% of their wages on childcare. The average family has to earn £88,000 a year in order to just have 2 preschool children. Obviously, the vast majority of families in this country don't earn 88,000 a year. And the reason that people are feeling this brokenness, this dispossession, this lack of control over their lives, this feeling that even their most basic needs aren't being catered to, is not because refugees are being sheltered in hotels or lingering around hotels, which, by the way, those refugees don't want to be there. Every time I talk to refugees, including people who are housed in these hotels, they are like, we want to get out of this asylum limbo and start a life and contribute to the kind of spaces that we see in that package. And I'm so proud that there are still people in this country, like those parents, that have the clarity to understand that the reason that we feel like these streets don't belong to us is because our community infrastructure and our community spaces, the things that make life workable, are being taken away from us and given to the very rich, given to real estate speculators, given to people who can afford a £1 million flat, a £2 million flat that is standing on the gravestone of what was a community centre. And I just think that it's so interesting that very real feeling that people have that the country is not for them, which is a real feeling and is grounded in reality, has been taken so far away from the material into these vague ideas of culture and, oh, does multiculturalism work? What does it mean to be British? Is Islam compatible with the West? When it's like all of this could be resolved spiritually and financially by having more community spaces where people get out of their homes, are not just sitting watching in YouTube and getting radicalized by various, right-wing rabbit holes on the internet and Tommy Robinson's, newsfeed, but actually spend time in their local community with one another and having the resources to be able to do that. And that is the robbery that has taken place. That's the robbery that people are feeling. But the far right, along with mainstream politicians, along with the mainstream media, have really effectively turned this into a question of race and migration and the idea of whether or not, modern Britain should have immigrants, and away from the very material fact that our city streets don't belong to us anymore because they belong to the very rich. And I'm very happy to see that these parents have the clarity, the moral, political clarity to be able to see through that. And it just makes me think so much about, all of these ideas about progress and luxury. To me, I don't look at things like, like Elon Musk wanting to get onto the moon and do all of these things, and Tesla and self-driving cars. To me, the point of progress is to get to a place where every neighborhood has a space like the one that was represented in that package that Ash made, where people of all different backgrounds are coming together and are sharing skills, are being with one another, are helping one another, and are able to do the basic things that humans are meant to do, like have a family. Not that everyone has to have a family, but it's an important part of being human, in comfortable, dignified conditions. And if only we were able and given the resources to create that for ourselves, rather than having that constantly pulled out from the rug underneath us by real estate speculators, so that those homes don't become a place where people live, but just become a line on someone's balance sheet. I mean, it's a sad state. It's a sad state of affairs, and it's the way that the media and journalists have betrayed this country by confusing and distracting people with things that are not really the main meat of the matter, and leaving us illiterate when it comes to understanding and being able to resist the forces that are actually taking us away from our communities and from our sense of control over our own lives.
That's the thing. It seems like the Conservative Party especially are trying to go down this line of the social contract is broken. I'm like, yeah, your motherfuckers broke it. That's your fault, that is, right? Between 2010 and 2019, councils were forced to sell off £15 billion of assets. £15 billion. If you're watching at home, that's stuff that you owned. You owned that stuff. And now that's in the hands of foreign multinational private equity firms or BlackRock or whoever it is, right? International capital, as you pointed out, using it as a speculatory vehicle. And those were our community assets in days of yore. Not only are people not having access to these things themselves, which makes it less likely to be able to have kids, the communities get worse, antisocial behavior gets worse, the social contract does break down, because we live in this neoliberal world where there is no such thing as society and there are only individuals. And then the Conservative Party, conservative politicians who were the patient zero for this breaking down of society, who were the ones who forced these things to be sold off into the pockets of their mates in the finance sector, now decrying what they would describe as the underclass going rogue, right? It's infuriating to me, because it was obvious to anyone who's looking at this would be the consequences of George Osborne's austerity push, the desire to shred the state as far as humanly possible. And we have no social infrastructure left to be able to engage in the social reproduction necessary to be able to keep a society going. And the breakdown that we're seeing pushed by figures on the far right of politics with a pretty awful agenda, it's no wonder that it's taking hold in a time in which, as you point out, people's lack of control, people's lack of stake. People don't have a stake in society anymore, because that stake got taken away as all the wealth, all the interest in society got filtered up into the hands of the already rich. Last month, the Financial Times reported that members of the Tony Blair Institute a think tank closely linked to Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, had been present at the viewing of a slide deck outlining a post-genocide plan for Gaza. Put together by Boston Consulting Group in conjunction with Israeli businessmen, the so-called Great Trust Plan would see hundreds of thousands of Palestinians ethnically cleansed from the enclave, and American megacorporations invited to special economic zones, such as the cringe-worthily titled Elon Musk Smart Manufacturing Zone. The Tony Blair Institute staff were part of group chats with those developing the project, and at one stage, a document was submitted to the group by a TBI staff member. When pressed to comment on these allegations by the FT, a Tony Blair Institute representative said this: "Your story is categorically wrong. TBI was not involved in the preparation of the deck, which was a BCG deck, and had no input whatsoever into its contents." When the Financial Times presented the representative with evidence of involvement in the group chats and the document submitted by the staffer, the TBI spokesperson responded: "We have never said that the TBI knew nothing about what this group was working on, or that they weren't on calls in which the group discussed their plans." Well, I mean, okay, sure, so you were part of the group who were doing these things. You knew these things were going. You knew the reality of those plans, and you didn't think it was worth telling anybody or crying foul about the reality or trying to influence. Like the fact that you can be there alongside people where, as far as I'm aware, according to the FT, the Israeli businessman's plan, which again, this BCG slide deck, involved literally paying 500,000 Gazans to be ethnically cleansed from their own land. The trailer park boys went, "I'm going to give you $100 to go away." And it's fine. We're just going to ignore this. We're just going to keep this all quiet. But this is an ethnic cleansing plan. But then again, when did humanitarian issues ever feature in Tony Blair's interests? The desire of the TBI to be able to distance itself from the post-war plan for Gaza is no longer tenable, however. Last night, it was revealed that Tony Blair himself had been present at a meeting with President Trump and Jared Kushner to discuss the future of Gaza. According to Axios, who broke the story, Blair had also previously been meeting with Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and Palestinian Authority Premier Mahmoud Abbas to discuss the future plans. This is how Novara Media's own Ash Sarkar reacted to the story on BBC Newsnight, and I think she speaks for all of us here.
How significant is the fact that Tony Blair's involved in discussions about a post-war Gaza?
Well, I guess it's because Satan was unavailable. I mean, look, Tony Blair and the Tony Blair Institute, it's never met a despot whose money they didn't want to take. All right. So they did work with, the regime of Kazakhstan. They took their money. They've done all kinds of PR work for some really, really grubby individuals. And I see this as a complete continuity of it.
Tony Blair cannot get his grubby, blood-stained hands off of the Middle East. First it's Iraq, and then it's Lebanon, and then he's a Middle East envoy, and now he wants to try and be the savior of Gaza and the savior of the two-state solution. Nobody wants you, Tony. Nobody trusts you, Tony. And the fact that I'm sure people across the political spectrum, at the very least, were at least receptive to what Ash was saying there, should show you the strength of feeling about what people think of you getting involved, Tony, in whatever happens in Palestine and Israel in future. Go away. No one wants you there. Ash then went on to say this.
At this current summit in Washington, there is no Palestinian representative.
That's true.
So this is a series of talks involving Israel and Westerners. And if you're Palestinian, there is no reason why you should trust this at all, because the history for Palestinian people has been every time that they've been removed or displaced, they've never been allowed to come back. And that's been from 1947, 1948 onwards. And the only serious discussion about what a lasting ceasefire, a lasting peace and a lasting day one plan would look like would involve leverage. And it would involve saying, okay, Israel has to not just agree to a ceasefire, but stick to it this time, which they didn't do in March, because otherwise no more military aid, no more military support, no more reconnaissance flights, no more trade deals. We're not just going to sanction individual settlers, we're going to sanction settlement goods, and we're going to sanction Israeli goods as well. That's the only way you get them to move.
100% correct. 100% correct there from Ash. Like, the amount of strongly worded letters that we've had to deal with now, or strongly worded statements or joint statements going, this is intolerable, this is really, really bad. I mean, you can actually do something material, You can actually, rather than just virtue signal about the individual settlers that you've sanctioned, or the woman from the Netflix video from Louis Theroux's documentary, and actually place real material consequences on Netanyahu, because that's all he listens to. All Netanyahu will respond to is might. I mean, he's very similar to Trump in that regard. I guess Trump is more easily bribed, I guess. But when it comes to Netanyahu, you must show a forceful response to force him by removing material support. I mean, the fact that we materially support a genocidal colonialist ethno-state in the Middle East for geopolitical reasons, despite them flagrantly violating international law with settlements and mowing the lawn even before October the 7th, is bad enough. Now there's an active genocide going on, the fact it's still going on, and we're still getting meetings of Western powers moving the chess pieces of the Middle East around without any representatives from the area as part of those talks, shows you how these people feel about the agency of the people in Palestine. Ash finished by highlighting something key that links Trump, Kushner, and Blair together.
I think the Jared Kushner element here is really, really important, because something that binds Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, as well as the ties of marriage and family, is an interest in real estate. And while I think that the Gaza Riviera plan is offensive, the idea that you can just displace a whole people and turn it into a holidays destination is disgusting. There is something which is consistent and already happening, which is in the United States, you do see these auctions and sell-offs of Palestinian land, what is under international law meant to be Palestinian land, to, interested parties in American real estate, particularly those who wish to settle, as part of the project of Jewish settlement of what they consider to be Greater Israel. So this is something which is already happening in some form, predominantly in the West Bank, and now they want to apply that to Gaza. So again, for me, this comes back to the central question of leverage, which is we know where the balance of Israeli opinion is, right? The balance of Israeli opinion is that there is majority support for expelling the people of Gaza. We know that there is majority support, and annexation and
that's
resettlement
despite
of
the
the West Bank.
protests we've seen this week from Israeli family hostages. You say there's
Sure.
majority
So
support.
there are protests, and while there is strong support for ending the war to bring back the hostages, there isn't strong support for allowing the Palestinians a state. That's where the political centre of gravity is. So if you want to overcome that, create a different incentive for Netanyahu and his cabinet, there has to be some kind of punitive consequences for Israel.
Totally on point there. Like on the first point she talked about with regards to the sell-off of land in the West Bank, they would use cynically in America, like American Jewish cultural centers or synagogues, whatever, to essentially commit international crimes, selling off of other people's land. And this was very cynically done because obviously protests sprung up and it was like, we are protesting synagogue. No, there's war crimes there's international crimes happening in the synagogue right there. The building that it takes place in is completely irrelevant to this story. The point is that an international crime is being committed and it must be opposed, right? It absolutely has to be opposed. And when it comes to, again, Israeli opinion, people always bring about, the Israelis want a ceasefire. Yeah, they want a ceasefire because there's like 30 hostages left alive that they want home, some of which are prisoners of war. As for the lives of the potentially hundreds of thousands of Gazans, definitely the hundreds of thousands who are at risk of starvation, the ones who are potentially buried under the rubble, I mean, they actually all support ethnic cleansing, these people in Israel, right? This society is not one that has any amount of empathy for the existence of the Palestinian people. And again, you can't get these people to see sense in a humanitarian way, right? It reminds me that in the Simpsons movie, where Mr. Burns is like, we want to do this thing. And the response is, no, why don't you look into your heart? Smithers is behind going, no, you can't get him to see reason. You cannot get them to have a humanitarian concern here. You have to look at what's in their interest and you have to hold them accountable and say, you don't get what you want. You don't get what you want. We are going to respond with, as was pointed out, punitive consequences. There has to be consequences for these people because all they understand is their own material interest. You cannot reason with people. You cannot reason with a population such as what we've seen with the priming of the Israeli population against Palestinians, right? When they don't actually have a moral concern that's there. It has no moral concern, so it cannot be reasoned with. Dalia, what do you make of those clips we just saw there today?
Yeah, I mean, I always find it so unbelievably chilling, even though we've spent 2 years watching this, but just watching like Western journalists in studios just so casually discussing like the uprooting and displacing of like 2 million people. Like, but this is just one opinion. What do you think? And I'm like, I think that is barbaric and insane, and I don't know how you can't see that. And I feel like I'm in some kind of twilight zone where that question even has to be asked. But I think this question of, what happens when the war ends, which obviously a lot of the focus is going on, and we're building a consensus really amongst most people, not within Israel necessarily, but around the world, that this war must end. But when I speak to Palestinians, both those who are in Gaza, those who are not in Gaza, they always talk about about the idea of the day that the war ends with kind of a bit of trepidation. And the reason that they do is because, as you said, Helene, as Ash, I think, said in that clip, they know that if they end up being displaced, they won't be able to return. But another word that they are very scared of, rightfully so, is this term reconstruction. The reason that they are scared of that term is because if done on the terms of the Tony Blair Institute, Trump, Jared Kushner, reconstruction simply means the continuation and completion of the genocide. Because in order to build Trump and Jared Kushner's vision of a post-war reconstruction within Gaza, in order to have those skyscrapers, the Gaza Riviera, hotels, all of this, you have to rip up all of the olive trees and all of the things that represent the Palestinian relationship to the land. And you have to remove any population that might get in the way of that vision. And they have a very genuine concern that when the war ends and, initiatives around the reconstruction plan begin to be proposed, people will take their eye off the ball, and people won't understand that reconstruction means recolonization. And what they call for is that when it comes to reconstruction, it's very important that the people in Gaza have control and sovereignty over what that reconstruction looks like. So why Tony Blair? I mean, you and I can look at this and say, who on earth would want Tony Blair's advice on what to do in the Middle East? Surely, anyone in their right mind will see that a lot of the issues in the Middle East, not particularly to do with Palestine, which goes much further back, but a lot of the issues in the Middle East that we see now can be traced back to the war in Iraq, which, was led by Bush and Tony Blair. Who in their right mind would want him back in the region? And it's because he's kind of the perfect guy for the Gaza reconstruction as recolonization plan. His expertise is in how to get away with war crimes and put a nice shiny surface on it, how to create a PR campaign that will allow you to get away with war crimes scot-free. He is an expert in how do you destroy a population in order to extract and steal their resources for their own gain. That is what he did in Iraq. He got away with leading an illegal war, with lying in order to get away with doing that illegal war, and he secured exactly what he wanted from it. The US and the UK now have control over Iraq's oil reserves. He got away with it, and he is making absolute bank on the speaking circuit as a result. So the fact that he is being roped into these incredibly extractive, exploitative, and frankly genocidal reconstruction plans is actually perfectly in line with his skill set. He has the perfect CV for it. So whilst the reason it doesn't make sense to you and I is because you and I want the Palestinians to have sovereignty and want the Palestinians to be able to live in a way that they define for themselves. But that is not what the people in power in Israel and the US want. That is not a goal that they share.
Couldn't agree more. And before we finish, a reminder that you can read more from Ash via the Novara Media Bookshop. Her book Minority Rule is available now, and 50% of the profits from all books we sell go towards funding our journalism. We're also aiming to stock the books of all the guests we've had on downstream. So if there's a particular interview that you have enjoyed, head to the shop.novaramedia.com to see what's on offer. Well, thank you very much for joining me this evening, Dalia.
Thanks for having me, Helena. And I just want to say, matching French tips. Love it. Love a French tip. You're looking fantastic.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, this one has fallen off. We are one nail short, and they've only been on for like a couple of hours now. So we may do. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.